Two contentions, but our first one has two subpoints.
Okay, it's recording.
And you guys?
Two contentions.
Two contentions?
No subpoints, yeah.
Okay, got it.
And you said your first one's the one with subpoints?
Yes.
Yeah, two. Okay. We're ready when you guys are. And we're AF, right? So we will, yeah. I'm second speaker and Shelby is first speaker.
Yes. I will. Is everyone ready? Then I will begin now. My partner and I stand firmly on the AF side of the following resolution. On balance, societies benefit from religious belief and practice. Contention 1. Religion promotes individuals' physical and mental health. Subpoint 1. Mental health. Religious belief and practices encourage mental well-being, improving individuals' mental health. Religious beliefs discourage suicide. In Hindu, religious beliefs are that if you take your own life, you will suffer in your next birth. In the study Suicidal Feelings in the General Population, a prevalent study, it states that, quote, with regard to the 49 studies, 80% reported less suicide, fewer suicide attempts, or more negative attitudes towards suicide among the more religious and spiritual, end quote. Religious gatherings also promote a sense of community, alleviate stress, and help improve mental health. According to the National Alliance of Mental Health, congregational gatherings such as Sunday church, Saturday Torah readings, prayer meetings, or full moon celebrations at Hindu temples provide structured social activities that help alleviate anxiety and help support people living with a mental health condition and their families, as well as providing additional benefits through community connections. Subpoint 2. Physical health. Religious beliefs and practices encourage a healthy lifestyle, improving individuals' physical health. According to the National Library of Medicine, quote, a physical health, religiousness was related to decreased smoking and alcohol consumption, as well as positively affecting heart disease and blood pressure, end quote. The religious belief of eternal life and life after death also has a positive impact. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism all believe in some version of eternal life. Research at them in the Detroit area found that, quote, a strong belief in eternal life seems to mitigate the deleterious effects of chronic health problems, financial problems, and on psychological well-being, end quote. Not only do these religious practices help participants of the religion, they also help the public and promote the general good. According to a 2014 report by Peter J. Brown of Emory University, the Catholic Church, one of the largest healthcare providers, operates 5,246 hospitals, 17,530 dispensaries, 577 prostate clinics, and 15,208 houses for the chronically ill and handicapped worldwide. And in 2016 Interdisciplinary Journal of Research on Religion, it states that religious organizations have donated $161 billion to the healthcare sector of the United States economic contribution. Society benefits from religious beliefs and practices actions as it promotes mental and physical health. Contention 2. Religion reduces violence. Religious believers are encouraged to conduct themselves in a positive way for their eternal salvation. All the major world religions hold the belief that how a person has conducted himself or herself while living on earth will greatly influence his or her soul's ultimate destiny after physical death. Religious beliefs that like thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal, mentioned in Exodus 20 in the Bible, promote peaceful actions and reduce violence within communities. These peaceful and less violent tendencies can be seen in the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, which found that only 5% of youths who currently attend weekly religious services have ever been arrested, and that the percentage goes up as attendance stops. Religions and religious institutions have also used their resources to promote peace during multiple wars and world conflicts. The World Council of Churches and the All-African Conference of Churches mediated the short-lived 1972 peace agreement in Sudan. In South Africa, various churches were at the vanguard of struggle against apartheid and the peaceful transition. The most dramatic and most frequent cited case is the successful mediation of the Rome-based community of Sant Egidio achieved to help end the civil war in Mozambique in 1992. The ideolo- ideologies behind religious beliefs have been used and quoted by religious and non-religious leaders to help solve world conflicts. President Obama, for instance, ended his speech at Cairo University in 2009 by quoting from the Quran, Talmud, and the Bible to underline the necessity of brokering peace between the West and the Arab world. More recently, Israel's President Netanyahu, when signing the peace agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, quoted the Bible saying, "May God bless his people with peace." And Iran's President Khamenei in an influential speech at the UN General Assembly in 1982 referred to Abraham, Jesus, and Muhammad to call for international cooperation. For these reasons, we see no other ballot than in the pro.
All right, are my opponents ready? All right, then I will begin on my first word. Beginning right now. I stand firmly on the negative side of the following resolution. Resolved, on balance, society's benefits from religious beliefs and practices. We have definitions on hand and will provide them if necessary. Contention 1, discrimination. When analyzing the societal benefits of religious beliefs and practices, the discrimination created cannot be ignored. From a report by the American Civil Liberties Union, quote, with increasing frequency, we are seeing individuals and institutions claiming a right to discriminate by refusing to provide services to women and LGBT people based on religious objections, end quote. Some legally documented examples of this phenomenon include Craig and Mullins versus Masterpiece Cake Shop, State versus Arlene's Flowers Incorporated, Elaine Photography LLC versus Wilcock, and Christian Charities versus DCFS, just to name a few. The last case, Christian Charities versus DCFS, is especially jarring since it's not just a private withholding of services based on the basis of race, gender, or sexuality, but a system of discrimination rooted in government and public services, all fueled by religious beliefs and practices. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, quote, the case involves whether a religious organization can demand government contracts to provide child welfare systems while refusing to comply with LGBTQ non-discrimination requirements, unquote. The then current system would only allow married couples to foster or adopt children in Illinois. But, quote, because the case predated the Illinois statute that recognizes that everyone, including same-sex couples, have the freedom to be married, the charity's potential policy intentionally classified all same-sex couples as unqualified to provide loving homes for children. In this course of Illinois litigation, child welfare experts offered testimony that allowing this form of discrimination harmed everyone. It deprived Illinois foster children of the care of loving families, and it discriminated against unmarried couples, including those in civil unions, and especially same-sex couples who were fully qualified to act as foster or adopted parents, end quote. Another example of religiously fueled discrimination is the 1979 LDS trial of Sonia Johnson after she participated in Utah activism to amend the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution. From the Washington Post Digital Archives, a 1979 article reports on Johnson's experience and the movement she was a part of labeled Mormons for ERA, which the church institution greatly opposed under the guise that God did not believe in equal rights under the law for men and women. This is another example of religious belief leading to the furthering of discrimination. And the ERA was never amended to the Constitution despite its simple wording and religious groups campaigning and government lobbying playing a large part in this. Moving on to contention 2, which is this government lobbying. Previous studies have analyzed the effects of afterlife incentive on religious behavior. Ozzie and Ehrenberg were the first to propose a theoretical model of afterlife religious capital. They analyzed the detriments of individuals' participation in religious activities, and among other results found afterlife beliefs to be a major detriment of church attendance. Blomberg developed a model where financial religious contributions are motivated by both current consumption and afterlife considerations. They show that afterlife considerations play an important role in explaining those financial contributions. Pine studies that the relationship between religiosity and the fear of death. He found that individuals who place a higher probability on the existence of an afterlife will rationally invest more in religious capital, end quote. So essentially, fear is used to incentivize good moral action, and the definition of what is considered to be good is based on scripture or the words of those who is profiting from financial religious contribution. This leads into the contention of government lobbying because by incentivizing their followers, it creates financial profit for religious corporations, whether that be the institution of a church or a religiously affiliated company or corporation. These organizations and corporations then use this money to lobby governments, which perpetuates issues such as these discussed in contention 1, discrimination. Some examples include the LDS churches lobbying against the Equal Rights Amendment and Equality Act, but government lobbying by religious organizations is not limited to certain religions. In fact, according to the Pew Research Center, the distribution is fairly equal. Quote, the number of organizations engaged in religious lobbying or religious-related advocacy in Washington, D.C. has increased roughly 5-fold in the past 4 decades, from fewer than 40 in 1970 to more than 200 today. These groups spend at least $350 million a year on efforts to influence national public policy, and this report is based on an examination of the websites, mission statements, tax documents, and other public records on these religious advocacy groups, end quote. Previous studies indicate that lobbying in general has increased rapidly in recent decades, but that the growth in the number of religion-related advocacy organizations appears to have kept pace with or even exceeded the growth in some other common types of advocacy organizations. Efforts by religious groups to influence U.S. public policy are a multi-million-dollar endeavor, with combined annual expenditures conservatively estimated at more than $350 million. More than 1/3 of the groups reported annual advocacy expenditures between $1 million and $5 million per year, while about about 1 in 10 reported spending more than $5 million per year. So we can see for these reasons that we should urge a neg ballot, and we continue to urge a neg ballot. Thank you. Are we ready for cross?
Yeah, and as F, I believe we have the right to first question.
Yep.
Okay, then let's start the time now. So, can you state that Pew Research statistic exactly? And can I have a
So the
follow-up?
Pew, the one in our second contention.
That's right.
Yeah, so what we talk about is the number of organizations that are engaged in religious lobbying in just DC alone. In 1970, there were fewer than 40, and today, which was about in 2010, there were 200.
And do you have any evidence about how these religious corporations are funding things that are bad to society, or just that they're funding?
Again, like we talked about with, as we saw with the LDS Church in 1979, with the example that we brought in, we also have many other examples that we'll continue to bring in throughout the rest of the round. But just for now, that's just one of the examples that we bring in.
But the 1979 evidence isn't about a corporation. Sure.
So going to your guys' first contention, your subpoint A, you talk about mental health. Can something that's discriminatory, can an institution that brings discriminatory ideas and brings certain groups of people down, whether that be people of color or people of the LGBTQ society, can that really be seen as something that can be a mental health benefit to society as a whole?
Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Shelby.
Sorry. As I said in our first contention, religious practices have actually found to more unite people within their religious gatherings and help them with their mental health because they're alleviating anxiety by having people with support them through it and help them with their mental illness and condition as well.
And that's okay.
If I can ask a question, so for the answer to your previous question, you stated you used that 1979 LSF trial. That isn't like involving a corporate. Is it involving a corporation or like a government lobbying? How was that tie into government lobbying?
Can I answer this? That trial, it's never, we're not talking about corporations specifically, but it is a form of government lobbying because government lobbying can be done by corporations, organizations, or nonprofit groups in general, which the church is a nonprofit group. And it's not just the LDS Church specifically, it's a lot of other churches that are considered under the law nonprofit groups. And they are able to use their income and the money made to lobby the government for beliefs that any religious denomination may have. And the same things happen with like the right to abortion, for example, like religious groups often lobby for those sort of things. So it's just lobbying in general, and that's just one general example we gave. Can I ask the next question? Okay, I was gonna say, were you guys saying that values are often promoted by religions such as, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, because there is an inherent fear of hellfire in the afterlife?
I mean, that could be a reason, but mostly just because religion promotes a goodness on the earth, not just because you want to have a good spot in the afterlife, but because it's the moral thing to do.
Yeah, but it promotes goodness by creating a fear of the afterlife. Okay.
That's actually not a question, but okay. So we have 3 minutes of prep time, and I would like to use some starting now. Okay, that's time. I used 1 minute and 40 seconds of prep time. So I have 4 minutes for this speech, correct? I do a quick question. Do we have a cross-sex after these two speeches? Okay, cool. So let's start the time now. So my opponents have two contentions. First, they have a contention on discrimination. Their second contention is on government lobbying. First, I want to attack their first contention, discrimination. So they state examples of aspects where religious organizations have refused to provide services to women or LGBTQ. And they specifically target the 1979 Mormons for ERA and the Christian Charity versus DFS. However, I have numerous examples of religious institutions doing the exact opposite, where they provide help and benefits to all members of society, regardless of their standing. For instance, my partner read earlier in our subpoint 2 physical health, where Catholic churches are one of the largest healthcare operators, with they have operating 5,246 hospitals, 17,530 dispensaries, 577 leprosy clinics, and 15,208 houses for the chronically ill and handicapped worldwide. As well as that, I have evidence here from a Silence Daily study that says the results show that Muslim Palestinians believe that Allah preferred them to value the lives of Palestinians and Jewish Israelis more equally, raising the possibility that beliefs about God can mitigate bias against other groups and reduce barriers to peace. The results show that although Muslim Palestinians participants valued their own group's lives over Jewish Israeli lives, they believe that Allah preferred them to value the lives of members of both groups more equally. In fact, thinking from Allah's perspective, decreased the bias towards their own group by almost 30%. Beliefs about gods seem to encourage the application of universal moral rules to believers and non-believers alike, even in a conflict zone. Thus, it does seem to be beliefs about God that lead to outgroup aggression. So basically what this is trying to say is that religion actually promotes more equity and inclusiveness than the opposite. In the status quo right now, we can see a bunch of institutions where we are trying to promote inclusivity and of different people. So it can be clear in the status quo right now that this is not the case. Even though their evidence does state instances where it seems like religious groups are seeming to be refusing to provide services. However, this is a 1979 trial which is also Mormons for ERA and doesn't accurately represent the status quo right now, as well as that. And the resolution is religion promotes the resolution is on balance society's benefit from religious belief and practice. And this is a more accurate depiction of how that is currently in the status quo. And so from this evidence, we can see that there are institutions, and more institutions, in fact, don't discriminate and in fact promote inclusivity. Now moving on to their second one, which is government lobbying. They state that there is an influence in lobbying and religious advocacy. And they also state that there are some religious groups who have done this. There's really 2 points I want to focus on in this and their second contention. The first is that the afterlife religious groups rely on fear to promote their messages, specifically that of the afterlife, which isn't true. The afterlife is something that religious peoples have to worry about, but more than that, people are usually choose to be religious because of the things that we've stated in our first contention. It helps alleviate anxiety, and it supports people through living with a mental health condition. It promotes inclusivity of the community. So it's not the fear of afterlife that is forcing them to do this. As well as that, just because people are giving money to religious groups doesn't necessarily mean that those religious groups are using it for evil. As I've said earlier in this speech, religious groups have been seen helping people. So if people are giving religious groups money so that they can benefit, it is good. So government lobbying isn't necessarily negative, because these religious groups who receive that money aren't necessarily doing anything wrong. And so unless they can definitively prove that, the second contention falls. That is all the time I have.
I'm going to take like 30 seconds of prep. So that was about 2 minutes of prep, a little longer than I said, but okay, this is 4 minutes, right? All right, I will begin time right now. All right, I want to start with our opponent's contention stating the religious beliefs improve physical conditions. I'll start out by addressing our opponent's claim that religious belief is effective in reducing suicides. So the problem with this is that suicide is often considered a sin in many religions, as our opponents pointed out, and something that will eventually doom them or commit them to an eternity or a life of suffering. So suicide is considered a sin in many religions, putting into question the incentive behind continuing to live. Are mental health statistics regarding religious people representative of the reality of mental health, or the fact that a common taboo attitude towards mental health leads those suffering to hide their struggles? Additionally, for a person suffering deeply and perhaps experiencing a desire to die, it likely seems a better option to live out a painful life and eventually go to heaven or paradise than to burn in hell for their sins and bring shame upon their family. The solution to mental health issues is to get help and treat them, not to keep them hidden out of fear of othering and community judgment, often from a religious community. Our opponent often also talked about values such as not stealing, not killing, and how that's not necessarily a facet of fear or incentivized by fear or the fear that is created by a religious community or a religion in general, that one might end up in hell and burn for eternity or suffer a horrible, miserable next life, but rather that they want community, as our opponent said, and simply want to have good morals. Well, first of all, that implies that people without religion can't have good morals, which isn't true. But other than that, it's the idea that yes, people do good things because they want to be good, and their idea of being good is what God deems as good. Now, you have to make God happy to go to heaven, which is the main incentive of good deeds for people who are of religious belief, especially in, well, not in all religions, but most. And then this is exacerbated by the fact that the opposite of going to heaven or being in God's graces is to be punished and be doomed to hell or a horrible next life, depending on the religious belief. And this has happened all over history. For example, in ancient Europe, or not ancient Europe, but like during Renaissance Europe, indulgences were sold by the Pope, basically for people to pay so that their family members wouldn't spend as much time in purgatory. And this was all out of a fear of hell as well, and having their family members in hell. So basically, people have been profiting off of religious fear for decades, or for centuries, I mean. Then our opponents also mentioned that religion has promoted peace during times of war and conflict. They mentioned specifically an example concerning apartheid. This is an example of a conflict where religious groups practice opposition, but it is also an example of religious justification for conflict. Miranda L. Jobin of Valparaiso University in 2016, from the decades-long pro-apartheid regime in South Africa was heavily supported by Christian denominations, specifically the Dutch Reformed Church, or the DRC, while other denominations and prominent Christian leaders such as Archbishop Tutu strongly opposed this oppressive establishment. So yes, there was a strong opposition to the apartheid movement from religious communities as well as from non-religious communities. But on the flip side, it was also heavily supported and justified as God's desire that the two different races be kept apart. So it's not exactly an argument for the benefits of religion if at the same time it was contrasted by these negative effects. And therefore we have to realize that without religion, people could still oppose racial segregation, but with religion, people can oppose it and support it. And then our attacks on contention one, they said, our opponent said that there is plenty of evidence that religious groups have helped accept people. The issue is that religious, for example, the religious groups are some of the primary healthcare survivors. The problem with this is that only in the US and developing nations is that really necessary, because there's either not centralized healthcare, or there have been years of religiously justified colonization that left developing countries in shambles, because colonizers and white Europeans believed that religion was a justification for them to take land. And that's time.
Okay.
Cross-ex again, right?
Yeah, for 3 minutes, right?
Yep.
Okay. I believe we go first. What percentage of religious institutions of their money is used specifically for lobbying?
So we don't have a number specifically, because obviously it's going to vary based on the religious institution, because every religious institution is going to be different. But what we do bring up in our case is the groups that we specifically talk about in our Pew Research study, the groups are spending at least it's conservatively estimated at about $350 million a year on efforts to influence national public policy. But that's just like a rough estimate. It's predicted to probably be likely more.
And adding on to that,
can I ask?
sorry.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
All right. Adding on to that also, just preemptively, I'd like to state also that it's not just the fact that it doesn't really matter how much they're spending, because they're spending this much money, or what percentage they're spending, because they're spending enough money to cause significant harm and significant damage to the law oftentimes, while at the same time, if there were no religious organizations and religion wasn't affecting society, then there would still be organizations forming in ways to raise money that did not require religion. It's not something that happens. It's not mutually exclusive.
Your statistic says nothing about where these monies are being spent, only that they're being spent. So you can't really say that this money is being spent to damage, correct?
I would like to disprove. I can't necessarily disprove that until summary, but I will be disproving that later in my summary speech. So going to your guys' second contention, you talk about how there's a violence reduction, and how this mostly comes just because of the practice. But if religion is all about the practice of fear, or if a lot of religious practice stems from the idea of fear and the idea of wanting to save yourself, then how can religion actually be something that is seen as a violence reducer when it has this like negative connotation to it?
I would say that religion isn't induced by fear, and instead people are able to choose which religion they choose because they're trying to choose where their moral beliefs personally rely. And if they more believe in to not kill people, and that's the moral thing to do, then they join religions that same values, and they do it that way.
But if they morally believe that the religion that they're joining is allowed to kill people, that's...
Sorry, we got a burning question over here, if that's okay. Shelby?
Is the general action of lobbying bad? Is lobbying always bad?
I would say in general, lobbying, it has the potential to be very bad. We can see negative examples of that throughout history, but we can also see positive examples. However, what we've seen throughout historically with religious lobbying specifically, that's negative. Also, religion and government is not something that should be particularly mixed together.
Yes, and also our opponent said the government lobbying can be for good, but the point is the separation of church and state ensures the society isn't tainted by differing viewpoints as not everybody shares similar beliefs. Government should not be influenced by religion. We're talking about society, but government lobbying is something that is negative towards society when it is caused by religion, because not everybody agrees on religious beliefs. And that's time.
Thank you. Is everyone ready? Then I shall begin. I first want to attack their point about lobbying. They give a lot of examples and show money, but where lobbying is going, but they don't about that religion is using money towards lobbying, but they're not specifically saying where it's going. I have evidence to show that that religions have been using lobbying for good. For example, the World Conference on Religion and Peace is an international organization of representatives of the world's most major religious traditions who meet and study and also lobby governments to have peaceful acts and create peace within our societies. Additionally, within our second contention, we talk about how religion reduces violence and show how religious leaders as well as religions have physically used lobbying to mediate wars and to help end wars, which on balance is benefiting societies because they're using this lobbying for beneficial reasons. They also talk about religion using their money specifically for lobbying, but I've also evidence to show that religions use their money for good. For example, in the latter case, agencies organized the American Committee for Relief in the Near East, known as the Near East Relief, which raised $20 million, sent relief teams into affected areas, fed an average of 30,000 people per day, and established administration all hospital services for Armenian and took charge of over 75,000 orphans. And they also use $1 billion per year. The World Council of Church mobilized over $1 billion per year for relief and development. They are using this money for good. They're using this for lobbying for peace and also promote good. This evidence also leads into my second tag about discrimination. They talk about discrimination. However, as my colleague previously said, They've been using money to help people with multiple hospitals and create multiple ways that services to everyone. It is not limited by a specific person. And the World Council of Churches mobilizing over $1 billion for relief and development in 162 countries. That does not depend on what their race is, what their ethnicity is. It's everyone in those countries simply to help them in their religions, promoting them in that way. Um, they are saying that religious beliefs like thou shalt not kill and is based on fear. However, in order for them to do that, they would have to first prove that people are forced to be in these religions and forced to choose those moral beliefs. People join religions because they share moral beliefs. They believe that thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal are moral ways to stay and stand by. People aren't forced into these. Additionally, they have not attacked our point talking about physical health and saying how religion has promoted and reduced blood pressure, heart disease, alcohol consumption, and it has helped the person individually and promoted in health of also the community as well. And for these reasons, I see no other ballot than the pro.
I'm going to take a few seconds of running prep. I'm going to begin that right now. All right, that was 40 seconds. If everybody's ready, then I will begin on my first word. So we'll begin now. So I'm going to be going over the attacks that were made on our case by my opponents. So their first attack was on our discrimination contention, and they talked about how the religion has the potential to actually uplift people. However, we want to bring up the examples like we brought up with the 1979 LDS trial. We also brought up other examples with the State versus Arlene's Flowers Incorporated, Craig and Mullins versus Masterpiece Cake Shop, Lane Photography LLC versus Wilcock, and then Christian Charities versus DCFS. I want to specifically point to Christian Charities versus DCFS because that is specifically a government organization limiting the ability of people in Illinois who are LGBT, because when the law was ratified, they were not considered, because gay marriage was not legal in Illinois at that time. These people are not considered married couples under this Illinois statute. And because of that, these Illinois people are not allowed to adopt or foster children. And that's simply discriminatory based on religious ideas. The DCFS, because of their Christian values, believe that these LGBT people are not capable of fostering a good home for these children. And because of that, we are not only seeing these LGBT people being discriminated against, it's also lessening the ability for people for foster children or adoptive children to be able to have a good, stable, steady home. So this cannot be something that can be seen as morally good for society because it influences corrupt behavior, such as what we've seen with Christian Charities versus DCFS. Second, going to our second contention, which talks about government lobbying. Their first attack, which going to the specific lobbying itself, is the money is not, we haven't proven that the money is being spent for evil things. However, I would like to simply state that all government lobbying that's used in the process of religion is considered bad, because separation of church and state, religion should not have any part in government policy. I have a piece of evidence here from Emory Law 2018 that says, quote, limiting religion in the legislative process and in politics more generally is typically justified on one of two grounds. First, that religious participation undermines the liberty and equality of all citizens. And second, that religious participation undermines the democratic process, end quote. So we can see from this piece of evidence is that religion single-handedly not only undermines liberty, equality, but it also undermines the democratic process, which are three of the most important things to our current society today. So if we're going to go look at the status quo, we are going to see that all government lobbying that's done by religious organizations, so all money that is used by these religious organizations to contribute to government lobbying towards national policy is very, very bad for society. Also going to the idea for the afterlife, when a institution is built on the idea of fear, there's not going to be a positive connotation that's going to be morally uplifting to society. And for these reasons, we cannot continue to see religion as beneficial. Thank you.
Okay, I'm guessing we need to remake a new Zoom probably. Okay.
We were so